Yasir Al-Saffar. Between 2002 and 2008, Yasir completed his Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery at the University of Hadramaut of Science and Technology in Yemen. Between 2009 and 2012, Yasir completed his Master of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Malaya in Malaysia. His thesis title here was The Effect of Biaxial Loading on Chondrocytes Seated in Agarose Gel. His supervisor was Dr. Belinda Murphy. In 2013, Yasir began his PhD examining deformation patterns of cracked articular cartilage. He's currently supervised by Dr. Belinda Murphy at the University of Malaya and Dr. Walter Herzog here in the HPL. He expects to graduate in 2017. Yasir currently has 6 conference abstracts, 1 published article, and 1 article under submission. While in medical school in Yemen, Yasir won a High Performance Student Award. Between 2012 and 2015, he was the recipient of a full admission scholarship for doctoral studies with guaranteed research assistantship from the University of Malaya. In 2016, he received a graduate research scholarship from the University of Calgary. Now, Yasir has volunteered in vaccination programs and several different social causes in Yemen. And in his spare time, he enjoys computer maintenance, traveling, exploring food cultures, and bicycling. Now, today, Yasir is going to be talking about his doctoral research in his seminar entitled Breaking Down the Mechanics of Articular Cartilage with Cracks. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you, everybody, for coming. So, as Ian said, I will be presenting to you my work. And the title is Breaking Down the Mechanics of Cracked Cartilage. So let's start. So why is it important for us to study cartilage in general? Because one of the major diseases that affect joints is arthritis, and especially osteoarthritis is a very common disease. It leads to debilitating condition for humans that are affected by it, limitation of movements, pain, and it end up being those patients not able to do their daily activities, as well as unable to, as well as requiring a lot of healthcare, which end up in billions of costs to the country every year. So what's the difference between a normal joint and an arthritic joint? Probably most of you already know that. But so the structure in the joint, we have the bones, and then they are covered by a tissue called cartilage, which is the white thing here. So in arthritic joints, this cartilage will be destroyed and the bones will impact on each other's, making the movement very difficult because there is no more smooth lining between them. And in this X-ray, you can see also that in this medial compartment, the femur and the tibia, they came into close proximity while they should be having a gap between them. So all those things exhibit at early stages in the cartilage. And when we open the joint, it's probably not easy to see that. But here we can see a rabbit tibia joint, tibia bone, and this is the tibial plateau. And so we have the lateral and medial plateau. And when we look at it just like with our eyes, we don't see necessarily the difference between both sides. But if we dip it with Indian ink, which is basically just an ink, and then we rinse that, we'll end up with a different view of the joint. And this view here, we can see that one healthy side and one not so healthy side. So the healthy side, basically, it has a smooth surface, so the ink does not attach to it, and it wash off easily. While the arthritic side, because there are irregularities in the surface and cracks, so the ink will get inside those deep cracks and get stuck there even if you wash it out. So this is a method of visualizing macroscopically with the eye how arthritis looks like. However, when we look on microscopy, it's much more clear, and we have here like a difference between like normal cartilage is a smooth, continuous surface. So imagine this joint can really slide, the bones can slide on each other with this cartilage. However, in the arthritic one, we have irregularity in the surface, we have erosion in some part, we have formation of cracks, and even some of the cells are multiplying. So there is a lot going on. But one of the striking features of osteoarthritis at the early stages of osteoarthritis is the formation of the cracks on the surface. So we want to know now what is the role of those cracks and how do they form. So is it like inflammation caused destruction of the tissue, or is it like damage by injury to the tissue caused then the inflammation? Maybe this is not ruled out yet, but we do know at least that with an impact loading on the cartilage, we can produce cracks on its surface. So even a high single impact loading will be able to produce a crack. So you can deteriorate from a totally healthy one to a cartilage with crack with one high impact injury. And in this study by Jack Lewis and his group, they also visualized the crack with the cartilage with the dual photon microscopy, and you can see the red color represents the dead cells and the green are the live cells. So not only they were producing the crack at the surface with an impact loading, but also they observed that the cells die around that crack. Generally, it seems in their study that cells elsewhere stayed healthy for around like 2 weeks, but the cells around the crack are dying. So this crack is not only a mechanical deterioration or change in the cartilage, it's also having a biological consequences in the terms of cell death. So let's look at this crack and how it's affecting the cartilage. But first, let's kind of refresh what is cartilage made of. So just like any tissue in the body, it's majorly made up of water, around 70%. And mostly cells, there is only one type of cells in cartilage called chondrocytes. And they actually are scarce in cartilage. Only 5% of the volume of the tissue is cells. And those cells are quite like poor cells because they need to build the tissue, they need to regenerate the tissue in case of injury. They take a lot of responsibility in this tissue. And they are not like floating in water, but there is something called proteoglycan, and this is a gel material. And this material actually, when you saw the water coming up, the water doesn't flow like with no rule into the cartilage. This proteoglycan has an osmotic pressure. So it has an ability to suck the water from the surrounding areas into the cartilage, making it inflate. However, this inflation of the tissue does not go unlimited because we have another reinforcing solid structure in the tissue, which is the collagen fibers. And those, as the water draws inside, they will extend until they become tense and there is like a balance in the tissue. Now, this structure of the collagen fibers is actually very unique in cartilage. And you can see that in the deep zone of the cartilage, they go upward toward the surface, and then they tend to start bending, going oblique. And in the surface, they end up being parallel to the surface. So it's kind of like they go kind of like the pillars, they go up, bend, and then in the surface, they become flat. So generally speaking, we have now 3 zones of the cartilage based on this feature of the collagen fibers. So we want to test this relation of the structure of the cartilage to its mechanical behavior with the presence of a crack. So we come up with our hypothesis saying that since the cartilage has a very neat structure, introducing a crack into that structure will affect its behavior. And then we specifically say that this will be reflected in a faster stress relaxation time. So our objective here in the study is we take mature cartilage and we test and compare intact cartilage versus cracked cartilage. And we want to see it in the terms of mechanical properties and histologically, what are the differences. So how do we do that? We take, just like I showed you, the rabbit samples. We take the knee joints from rabbit. We collect all the femur, tibia, and patella from each joint. And we group them randomly into 3 groups here. Intact, which just collect the cartilage. We don't do anything to it. And then we have a compression only, where those samples, we collect them and we'll do some compression testing on them. And then a last group where we'll do a crack and a compression, and then we'll be able to compare. So all the samples will go through histology. So the intact will be our reference to measure in comparison. And those 2, obviously, they will go for mechanical testing, then histology. So I just want to also mention that those 2 kind of symbols, this will mean compression only group, and this will mean like a sample with a crack plus a compression. So this, I will use it throughout my presentation. So how do we introduce the crack? Quite simple and straightforward. We have a thin blade, strong blade, and we cut perpendicular to the surface, and also perpendicular to the collagen fibers of the superficial zone. We introduce it and we pull it out, and this would be the remaining location of the cartilage, of the crack. So the dimensions of the crack are the dimensions of the blade, which is 0.75 millimeter by 0.2, and the length of the crack is the same as the tissue thickness. So we'll go until we hit bone. How do we do our mechanical test? So we start by a 20-minute mechanical compression. And it goes by, first, we compress the tissue at a steady state, at a steady rate, until we reach a target pressure of 2 megapascal. At that point, we hold the indenture in position, and we detect the stress relaxation behavior of the tissue. And we continue to collect for 20 minutes to reach until the balance or steady state. So this is the first compression test. And then we give the tissue a 1-hour rest. After that, we do a second compression. So we're doing this 1-hour rest because imagine if you're like compressing your skin or something with your nail, and then you will have like a dimple on your skin. To be able to test it again and compare with time what is the difference that are happening, you need to wait until that tissue goes back to reinflate, and then you test it again. So we want to make sure first that our first compression is not damaging the cartilage by itself, even without having a crack. And then for the cracked samples, we will introduce the crack at the end of the 1 hour of rest. So for the cracked samples, we will have compression, 1 hour rest, crack, and a second compression. So compression before and after having the crack. In the compression-only samples, we had the same thing without the introduction of the crack. Now, this 1 hour rest here also is important for the crack, for the cracked samples, because it shows that it will tell us whether giving 1 hour rest to the cartilage, did it allow it actually to go back to its resting state, or was it not long enough? Now all the sample will end up going to histology. So now we start with the results, and we have the mechanical data from our samples, and we have our compressed only samples. This is the first stress relaxation test, reaching the target pressure and then going down, stress relaxing, and you can see the indenture going down and then holding in that position, so at a fixed strain amount. After the 1 hour rest, we do the second test, and we check the data that we have, and we get the same curve, the same behavior, same amount of strain to reach that targeted stress. So basically, we are getting same mechanical behavior before and after the 1 hour. It seems that the cartilage did not change, and this is good. This is what we were wanting to see. Now, for the second group, which is the cracked and compressed group, this is now the first test before introducing the crack, and we see the same thing. And after making the crack, we test it again, and we were expecting to see a different mechanical behavior, but actually once we collected the data, it showed that cartilage is doing the same and it did not really get affected by the presence of the crack. So we were like, okay, that's interesting. Our hypothesis is not what we expected. That's a bit disappointing, but let's look at the histology. So we look here at the compressed only group, and you can see here the edge of the compression. So in histology, actually, after the end of the second compression, we use a fixing technique, which even when you remove the indenture, the tissue will not swell back. It will hold that kind of shape. And the main differences is we can see that, of course, the cartilage became shorter because of the strain. Things are more crowded here. And one thing that we can also know that the cells here, while they are aligned kind of in nice lines, in the compressed area, they seem to be a bit kind of, the line has started to be more of a C shape rather than a straight line. And this is probably not too extraordinary, because when you compress any material in one direction, it tends to go out, extend in the other direction. So it seems there is like some bulging effect from the sides. This is the bone and the calcified region. Now, when we go to the group where we have the crack and the compression, and we look at it, we also see the indentation, everything, but we don't see the crack actually. And it was so difficult to actually see the crack that we even thought we mislabeled the samples, and we were like, is this a cracked sample or is it actually a control sample? So we keep on zooming on the sample and looking, and then this is the crack location actually. And I don't know, maybe now you can see that there is like a small slit here. Probably not, you can't see it. So when we saw that looking at the cartilage is so difficult under light microscope, we opted to use another technique, which is polarized microscopy. So polarized microscopy use some like physical behavior, which is called birefringence. Birefringence mainly, or like basically, it's like the behavior when you have like a plastic ruler that is transparent and then you bend it and look at it in the light, then you get like a rainbow color inside it. So if there is like stress in the material, it will bend the light in different patterns. So this is birefringence. And cartilage natively has a birefringence property. So when you look at it under polarized microscope, it shows an enhanced contrast and it gives a general indication of the collagen fibers directions inside it. So here we can see that now the location of the crack is actually better viewed, and I'm going to highlight it for you. It's like a bent line, but obviously it's closed. And unless you look at high power only, like the very tip of it is a little bit open, everything else is closed. One other feature we can see here is also, you can see this kind of like wrinkling effect in this region of the transitional zone, or maybe it's not even transitional. So this is still like part of the deep zone, because rabbit cartilage has a big deep zone and then a small transitional and then a superficial zone. But you can still see this wrinkling in the picture of the cartilage. And this what translates to is the birefringes and the change in the color and contrast in the picture is because of the collagen fibers. And imagine if you have like the collagen fibers going upward and you are compressing them, so they are crimping and their direction is changing, hence their color changes. So it seems that once you are compressing, most of the compression and the deformation is taken in this region mostly, and it's kind of by crimping of the collagen fibers. However, the deep zone still shows some of the bending where like the cells, especially like in this edge, seem to not be like going perpendicular, a little bit bent outside. So with polarized microscopy, we were able to find our crack. We were able to see that it's actually closed. So maybe because it's closed, we didn't see any mechanical change in the behavior after the second compression. So one feature that was not that clear in that picture I'm showing here, it's also polarized microscopy using a different stain. It's called picroseries. And this is basically what it's showing also information about the collagen fibers direction. And I'm going to show you like a clearer view of this, but I just want to explain one thing on this. So if you take this line that goes from the edge of the compression to like the center and goes up again, basically what this is, as the collagen fibers, you can see the cells here are bending this direction, and above the line they are bending this direction. So because of the change of the direction, there is a contrast. One time it appears green, one time it appears yellow. It's just because of the angles they are at. So we can see that this type of deformation is different between this compression-only sample and this one that has a crack. While the line goes from the edge all the way to the center and rise again, this one goes from the edge, goes down and rise again to the edge of the crack, to the tip of the crack. And there is another one small on this side, is going from here to here. But because the sample is very bent, it didn't show exactly like the other one. So basically what it's telling us this, that the collagen fibers in this zone are going like this C shape and this C shape. So kind of opposing C shapes, while here they are going in this way and in this way, not all opposing to each other toward the center of the sample. So this is a diagram of what's happening. The collagen fibers here in one compartment, the center is kind of like the mirror line. While once we make the crack, it seems that we are ending up with like two mechanical compartments that are acting each independently, but like what a normal cartilage would act. Still, with this kind of compensation method, the cartilage was giving us the same mechanical properties during the second compression. So it seems like it's good. It's compensating for a damage that is happening on it. So the conclusion in our study is that the edges of the crack that we made with our blade perpendicular to the cartilage surface seems to not open even during compression. And then that the collagen fiber exhibit buckling and crimping at the same time to take up the load that is applied on it. And also the presence of the crack changes that the way on the pattern of this buckling between one compartment and like two compartment behavior. So when we finished this study and we are looking at the results, and we're still like thinking, is like why making a damage to a material is not really showing any change in the properties. And we thought a bit about it, and then thinking more about the structure of the cartilage. So especially with rabbit, where the deep zone is actually major part of the cartilage and only a small transitional and superficial zone. So we thought, okay, actually the crack that we're introducing on this cartilage is cutting the majority of the cartilage, which is the deep zone, parallel to the fibers. So it's like the fiber is standing here and we are cutting the blade next to it. It's not really introducing a huge damage on the fiber structure and their attachment to each other's. So we thought, okay, what can be an alternative to see the role of those collagen fibers if they were to be damaged in a different way? So this was the story for the mature cartilage. But now there is a different type of cartilage, which is actually the immature cartilage at younger ages. The cartilage, when it's growing, it has a different structure. So the differences are the cells in the deep zone, instead of being kind of squeezed between the fibers and following the longitudinal axis of the fibers, they are actually round. There are generally more cells into the tissue. And also the fibers in the deep zone are going parallel to the surface instead of going perpendicular. So now we are seeing like an opportunity for our crack study that may be going to be different. The other transitional and superficial zone are still there. There are some other differences, but those are kind of the main differences, especially in relation to the collagen fibers. So we think here like, okay, if we are having our crack on the immature cartilage, then we'll be cutting those fibers perpendicularly. It's probably going to damage them more. We might see a change in the mechanical properties of the tissue. So we come with a second hypothesis, and we say that the collagen fibers actually play a role in the biomechanics of a crack. And also that those fibers, as we said, like inside the swelled cartilage, they are under tension. We say that in this case also they are under tension. And we go to study it. Same objectives, we are checking intact versus cracked cartilage, in this case in the immature cartilage. And we are also looking at the mechanics and histology aspects of the study. So we come up with our samples. For immature cartilage, it's not easy to get it from rabbits, so we get that from pigs. And we get osteochondral explants. We divide them here into 4 groups. So we have the same previous 3 groups, the intact cartilage, but we add also a crack-only samples, and I want to tell you why. And then we have the 2 compression-only and crack and compression. So as we saw the buckling in the first study, we were thinking, okay, if this is going to be the case now and that the crack might open, what if the crack is opening because of the compression and not because of the fibers? So we have a sample where we only have a crack, and we have a sample where we have crack and compression, and we see if the interaction between those two is different. And all samples go to histology, and those 2 groups that have compression, of course, we collect the mechanical data on them. We do the same crack, the same dimensions with the same blade, so to be able to compare to the previous study. So this is kind of just a visualization of what I said. The expected difference between previous and current study is that the tension in the deep zone here is parallel to the crack. This way it might not open it, while here it's perpendicular to the crack, so it might open it. The loading protocol we used is exactly the same in terms of time-wise, but the loading target we chose is a bit higher because pigs are bigger animals. They experience more loads. So we go to around 7.6 megapascal, and we're loading at a bit faster rate. This is the data from our compressed only sample. So we have our pressure also rising to our target pressure, and then we hold the indenter in that position and let the tissue to go into stress relaxation. And then we do the second test, and no crack, so the behavior is still the same. Is good. So it means that 1 hour of rest also was good for the pig samples. Now we look at the crack with the compression, and the first test is of course the same, but when we do the second test, now we do see a difference. So what this graph is showing is actually that to reach that same stress level and target load, we need to strain the tissue more to reach that same stress, which is indicating that the way that whether the solid or liquid phase of the cartilage are acting is different. And then actually this is not the full graph, this is just to 200 seconds. If we go like all the way to the end of the 20 minutes, the resting pressure also of this cracked cartilage tends to be lower than the resting pressure of the non-cracked cartilage. So we look at histology. We have our intact samples for reference. This is also polarized microscopy, but this is like an even kind of more enhanced view and more advanced way of imaging. So you can see this wheel here, that colorful wheel. This gives us information about the collagen fibers direction. So the color tells us the direction. If it's blue, it's horizontal. If it's kind of reddish, it's more perpendicular. And the intensity of this light tells us, are those fibers aligned with each other or they are like random? So anything that is dark in color, it's more random, and anything that is bright in color, it means the fibers are well aligned. So we can see that in the transitional zone, it's a bit darker, which it is a random region for collagen fibers. In the deep zone and the superficial zone, they have the same color, which is bluish and like parallel to the surface. This is what I showed like in the diagram. And when we compress this sample, basically what we see is majorly the transitional zone is also getting a little bit more parallel to the surface and getting a bit brighter, which means their fibers are getting more aligned. The deep zone is getting a bit brighter because the fibers are getting more compact and even more aligned. So this is what we see in this view. When we look at our compression and crack, now we see a crack, which is like very relieving to us when we look under the microscope, because it's easy to locate it. And this crack, I'm highlighting it here, it's actually quite open. So it's not like only there, like you just see it, it's actually open. And the major differences here in the collagen fibers is kind of the same, also more intensity in the deep zone, and the transitional zone is becoming a little bit more realigned with the surface. But it seems that when we have a crack opening, we're getting a change in mechanical properties. When we don't have that, the mechanical properties are not changing. So a picture now of the samples that we just did the crack on with no compression. And you can see that we can still locate the crack location here. It's not that difficult to see. However, it's not that opened as the one with the compression. And the deep zone starts around here, which is the bluish color. So you can see in the deep zone, it seems to be a little bit wider than in the rest of the cartilage. So at this time, it seems that our hypothesis is actually going quite okay with the study. And this is just like a visual comparison. Mature cartilage where the fibers are going parallel to the crack, it does not open. We don't get a difference in mechanical properties. Immature where the fibers are going perpendicular, pulling on the crack edges, it's opening, and we get a difference in mechanical properties. So the conclusion is exactly that having a difference in the structure in the cartilage may lead to different behavior of the cartilage mechanically, and also that the fibers direction are probably playing a role in the shape of that crack. So because the polarized microscopy don't only give us those beautiful colorful pictures, but it also gives us numbers about those fibers directions and their alignment. So we said, okay, we're not only seeing that crack opening, we want to measure if that is related to the actual fibers direction and alignment. So we propose another thing, and it's a model where we use the data collected from the polarized microscope to make a predicted shape of the crack and see whether that follows with the measured shape of the crack. So in our histological sample, we measure 2 areas on each side of the crack, and we are averaging the values, and we get a graph that represents the values for those regions of interest going from the surface all the way to the deeper region. And we have a graph for the angles of the fibers and another one for the alignment of the fibers. So if we look at the alignment values, anything that is high indicates that the fibers are well aligned. So we can see in the superficial zone, collagen fibers seems to be well aligned because also they are showing quite bright. And then in the transitional zone, they are going very low, which is because they are random in direction, not well aligned. And then in the deep zone, they seem to kind of pick up a little bit of better alignment. When we look at the degree values of those fibers, so here is the 0 value, which represent parallel to the surface. Anything parallel to the surface reads at 0. And then we have in the transitional zone, we have the fibers are going more not parallel to the surface, to like more oblique side. And then in the deeper zone is going back to be parallel to the surface. So for this angle values, we take them and we calculate from them something we call the pulling factor. Basically, it means we having the crack edges at this location. So how perpendicular that collagen fibers or those collagen fibers are to that crack edge. Are they, we give them a value from 0 to 1. 0 means they are parallel to the crack and they are not pulling, and 1, it means they are perpendicular to the crack, so they are pulling with their highest possible force. So then we take that pulling factor and we multiply it with the retardance value, or which is basically the alignment value. And we come up with our index or model. We call it the crack width index. So basically, this is a multiplication of the pulling factor with the alignment values, and it goes, of course, from the top to the bottom of the cartilage. So we go back to our sample, and this is our real crack. And now we see our predicted crack width index, and we can see that it's following the same pattern, where in the surface it predicts that the crack should be wider, and we have it wider, and then a narrowing in the transitional zone we can see here, and then not too much difference, but it's a little bit wider in the deeper zone, which we do see in the samples. And that goes like for other samples too. So even the sample that I showed earlier, when we zoom in and I highlight this and I have a crack width index for it, calculated for it, it also shows wider superficial zone, narrower transitional, and deep, and wider again in the deep zone. Now those are for the compressed samples. For the crack without compression, we still see this pattern, even though it's because it's thinner, it's not really going to be as clear. But here I kind of stretch the crack width index to show you. So we have a little kind of opening in the surface, narrowing a little bit in this transitional zone, and then gradually becoming a little bit wider. So it seems that our proposed model is standing up, and it is predicting the cracks in the way that we're relating them to the feature or like the data collected just from the collagen fibers. So now this is our final conclusion, is that first of all, the crack width index seems to be working, and that the collagen fibers appear to act on the pulling direction in the way they are interacting with the crack. And if those things we are seeing are true for all types of cartilages, that might lead to a conclusion that maybe in immature cartilage, if you are having a damage on it, physical damage where there is a crack and the fibers are going to open it during loading and even at rest, it might be more difficult for this cartilage, which is already known to be low in its ability to regenerate. It might be even more difficult to regenerate because there is a gap now forming. However, for mature cartilage, because there is no gap formation, it might not be that much of same severity of problem. We still keep in mind that, however, the immature cartilage has higher cellularity. Generally, younger individuals have better ability to regenerate their tissue, so that might balance out. But it's something important like to keep in mind. So that's all for my presentation. I want to thank everybody that helped us and the funding. I want to thank Dr. John Matthias, who helped us a lot with the polarized microscope, and Ruth. She is great in histology work. Everything she does is fantastic. And Azim and Andre, they helped a lot on the technical side of the project. So thank you everybody for listening, and I will be happy to have your questions.
thinking about the possibility of having cracks not perpendicular to the bone surface.
Yeah.
When you have, like, you're in a compression test, if we approximate the state of stress as a uniaxial compression,
Yeah.
the maximum shear happens along 45 degrees, right?
Yeah.
If you introduce a crack in that direction,
It's probably going to be different.
the crack cannot definitely support
Yeah.
any shear stress. And I guess that you end up with a
Different scenario, yeah.
mechanical response. Have you considered?
So I have actually done some studies on this. We did run in some technical difficulties in doing this, because when you cut a cartilage at a 45 degree, most of the time it tears away. It opens up just by introduction of the blade, even before you do a mechanical test. With the few cases, like maybe one case where it held kind of a bit, it was true. Like when you compress it, it's a totally different scenarios, because you have two now like this, and the compression is not uniaxial along the crack axis, so it will slide and there is shear, and it's a totally different scenarios. However, we did this first because it's no one has looked actually at the presence of the crack and how does that influence the mechanical behavior of the cartilage before. Most people look at the cartilage like, okay, with a crack like we saw in cell death and stuff like that. But in terms of mechanics, there was not many studies. And we just wanted to make it as kind of simple, start with a very simple problem before we go like to complicated things. So one of the simplifications was also to make the crack perpendicular. Also for the rabbit tissue, because most of the when you impact the cartilage and it will, like the spontaneous crack will form, it actually follows the architecture mostly of the collagen fibers. So it will start like from an angle parallel to the surface, then oblique, and then shear kind of directly. And because most of the thickness of the cartilage is straight, is perpendicular to the surface, we thought, okay, so we are also kind of mimicking more accurately or closer the crack that will form during like an impact. We are missing the two zones in the superficial and transitional, but we are getting something close for the radial zone. So yeah, that is something that I really tried hard to make it happen, but technically it was problematic. Maybe I need a different type of knife, or maybe cutting the tissue using laser or something else.
What if you create the crack when the cartilage is frozen?
So I didn't try that, but one problem is the blade has thickness to it. So even this 0.2 millimeter thickness, when you introduce it in the crack perpendicular, the cartilage will kind of give up a little bit, and once you put the blade, it will come back. But if you use anything thicker, or even the same blade at a different location, at a different angle, so what happens is this cartilage, when you are putting it perpendicular, you can imagine that all the cartilage is kind of still supporting the side, but when you're putting it like this perpendicular, the first layer of the tissue just peels off because of the thickness. And I guess if you have a frozen tissue, it might actually just break instead of peeling, because if it's harder and stiffer, it might just break because of the thickness of the blade. Maybe if we get a thinner blade, that might help out. Yeah. Yes.
I guess I just want to question whether, so you're interested in cracks that occur in injury. Is your experiment where you cut, is that representative of the kind of crack you get in injury?
So this is a very good question. So as I was telling first, like for the rabbit sample, it's probably the realistic, standardized way to make a crack on a cartilage. So there was an option where we can actually impact the cartilage, make a crack, and then measure it. But then when you impact cartilage, you will get cracks of different shapes, and sometimes you'll get two small cracks, sometimes one big, different combinations. And we wanted to just get a trend and a pattern for the cartilage. So we chose to use a blade instead of just going with the impact loading. Still, as I'm saying, for the major thickness of the cartilage, which is the deep zone, the crack we are forming is still going with the direction of the fibers. So it's not the best, but it's kind of okay for the abilities that we have. It will be awesome if we can actually make a cut like this curved inside the cartilage, but technically we didn't figure out how to do that. And then another thing is, like we are interested to see for impact loading, but generally also a crack in a cartilage. So just because we looked in the literature review and it didn't seem to be like a lot of information about this. So we wanted to establish some knowledge about it.
Okay, well, it's not my field.
Yeah, okay.
I think I would make a complaint about field, which is
Yeah.
I would not call that a crack.
Okay.
Because that implies that it is like the injury. So the operation is a cut. So I would call that a cut. And then
Okay.
so then it's explicit that
Yeah.
cut is not necessarily the same as a crack.
Yeah. So yeah, like I would say like I cut the crack, or like I cut the thing into, yeah.
I say this is that if I was studying something like fiberglass or carbon fiber,
Yeah.
I think it's pretty well known.
Yeah, it's a
Called a fracture that is very
Yeah.
different from cutting. So in a fracture, all sorts of weird things happen. Sometimes it's not the fibers breaking; it's really the interface between the fiber and the matrix.
Yeah.
That heals. So it's just that what happens in the cutting operation
Yeah.
is extremely different, even though superficially it might look kind of similar.
That's very true. Terminology wise, I totally agree that when you talk about materials in the engineering sense, crack is not something that you cut, crack that results from. But when you read about literatures in cartilage, they tend like here in this study that I showed with the impact and all the other ways, and some other studies where they actually cut, but they don't do the testing mechanically, or they do a different type of thing. They do use the term crack. So it seems to be this understandable kind of term in this community. So I just followed that term. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Bear.
I want to build off on that. So when you do look at a crack in the clinical situations, if you're able to, does it look like a cut, or does it really just look like the ground substance has been separated and the collagen fibers are still intact, holding everything together? Because I would still call that a crack, but it's going to behave mechanically different than one that.
So the shapes of the crack and their morphologies are very variant in cartilage, and their causes are also different. So impact loading will cause different shape. Cracks that are happening because of an advanced stage of osteoarthritis are totally different in shape. And then you have like cracks that are intraoperatively introduced when like the surgeon, just the blade goes a little bit off and it cuts. That is probably the closest to the one we do, which is like a real blade cut. But morphologies are so huge and so big and random in cartilage. We are just trying here like to like like control for different variables and just make it something we can compare between samples.
And then how many cracks did you create in your sample?
So for each sample, I just do one crack. Yeah, we tried with also multiple cracks. That is like some pilot study we tried, but it seems that with the sensitivity of our devices, plus the techniques of how well you can make cracks close to each other's and still get a flat enough surface that you can test on, you run into complications in just the methodology wise. But it's something that we tried. We didn't really detect big difference, but there are some other ways. Sometimes some other researchers test this in a different way where they actually make a defect in the, so they don't only make a crack, they make a crack and then they remove the tissue that is next to it. So you get like a flap of cartilage that might fall off, and there are different ways to go through this, yeah. Yes, Andrew?
So how did the blade measure in size compared to your indenture? Like, did the indenture cover the whole cut region?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I showed the dimensions of the crack, but I didn't say about the indenter. So the indenter diameter is 2 millimeter in diameter, which will cover, which on the surface the crack is only 0.75 slit cut, you can say, and the indenter is well covering that region. Yeah.
Do you think it would be different if the cut was longer, so that way it was cut exposed on either side of your indenture, so you could actually get a fluid flow?
Yeah, so the case where the crack did not open, it seems that we did not have a fluid flow, or at least we are attributing the no change in the mechanical properties because the cartilage sealed and fluid probably was not able really to flow outside. However, for the cracked sample, for the immature cartilage where the crack opened, even though we still had the indenter, it seems that the indenter on the surface of the cartilage was not really able to seal the water. So if the crack is opening, water seems to be able to find a way out. So, but yes, some other studies suggest that maybe we can do the crack longer or sometimes do the crack next to the compression, not actually under the compression, to totally eliminate the effect of sealing or using a porous indenter. There are many ways to look at it, yeah. Yes, Doctor.
The cartilage is clearly a viscous element.
Yeah.
And your immature cartilage, you press it 3 times the speed of the
Yes.
mature one.
Yeah.
And so might that be a variable that gives a broad rope? Did you try it?
Yeah, so the reason we changed the load and the speed, we actually wanted to change even the speed for the rabbit because compressing the tissue at 4 micrometer per second, it's not, even though we are reaching a target, the target load is within the physiological range, our rate of loading is not really in the physiological range. So we try to go higher, like faster, but because of how thin the cartilage is, like our machine, like you're just pushing the sensitivity limits of the machine and you can, so you go slower to actually be able to detect the peak and the stress relaxation. However, in the peak cartilage, in the immature, it's considerably thicker. So rabbit goes up to like around 0.5 millimeter thick, around that dimension. Pig goes up to like 2 millimeters. So in some locations. So that gives us really ability to go faster. And we increase the load also because it's a different animal and it experiences like different types of loads. So that, and we did try also the slow speed. It was, it didn't like give much differences. And I would say that the measurement at that point were like too insignificant to the sample because the sample is allowing us to go a bit more into the physiological range. So just leaving that away was not really the decision that we wanted to go with. Yes, more.
You kind of show the immature compared to the mature cartilage.
Yeah.
In humans, do we know when that development kind of occurs, when the orientation of the collagen fibers changes?
So this is like for humans, it's suggested that it happens. I don't have the age at which it happens. And actually there is not a lot of research that looks at when do the mature cartilage. Skeletal maturity usually is looked at in terms of bone maturity. And cartilage has been left behind, like no one is looking at it. And those information came mostly from like articles we discovered from the veterinary side because for the animals, like the meat kind of industry and this, they usually take younger animals and sometimes they have older animals. So it seems that they took notice of this at some point and they let us know about it. But for humans, I'm not sure at which range it happens. Yeah. Yes, I mean.
So you introduced a full thickness crack in rabbit cartilage and you didn't see any difference in mechanical properties. What was the reason?
So the way we thought of it is you are doing a crack and this crack is not opening. So basically you're pulling the blade and everything is staying in its place.
But you don't know that because in the, like during the compression you don't have any idea what's happening.
So it's true, yeah. Like we don't have a real-time view of what's happening during the compression. It might be opening and then closing again or something like that. We, however, think that it's highly unlikely because you still do have some friction between the indenter and the cartilage. So if the cartilage is bulging outward and you are, because of the compression, just like any material, and it will open, why after like long time it will go back and close and go against the friction, and now also you have the edge against the indenter, so to close it will need like to crawl back. So it seems that it's an unlikely thing to happen, but we can't really say until we actually see it in real time. Yeah. Yes.
I noticed in a lot of the images there that the bright yellow means that they're highly organized and then are highly aligned, and then the
Okay.
red is that they're not aligned. Is that correct?
Highly yellow. So
With your polarized images.
yeah.
The color scale again.
So I can probably go back to like some images.
So
Yeah, like maybe. Yeah.
highly aligned.
Yeah. So this is here is the bone actually.
Yeah.
And you can see because the crack stops here, we stop at the bone. And this is our cartilage. So the blue color is the horizontal fibers will be blue in color, which is the color of the superficial zone. And then bluish, greenish around the horizontal. Anything pink, yes, or red is vertical. Yeah.
So with the subchondral bone there, when you in certain images when it's uncompressed,
Yeah.
all the images when it's uncompressed, it's very bright yellow and then changes to dark pink. Is that it seems like it almost changes more.
Oh, you mean for this
Cartilage.
region?
Yeah. And if you look at the other
So yeah.
bright yellow.
So that is also a difference in structure of the cartilages, because the picture that you see here, like this one, is your meaning, right? It's a bit yellowish. This is an immature tissue versus that one was a mature. And it seems that, yes, in the subchondral region also there is a difference in the way that the collagen fibers orient. So in the deep one, the fibers are more upward and supporting the cartilage. And while in the immature one, they seem to be also like random or not that much upward, like they are going at different angles. And this is probably part of the process of the growth of the cartilage, because the way that cartilage grows is by kind of deposition. So like a layer of what is cartilage goes, and then if it calcifies, it becomes bones. If it doesn't calcify, it stays as cartilage. And this is how it goes. So cartilage does not have intense remodeling, but bone does have remodeling a lot. So once you reach the mature stage, it seems that this kind of look goes more into like more perpendicular thing. Yeah.
I thought I saw a difference between compressed and uncompressed. Is there
Oh. So the uncompressed is the picture that I showed is also for immature.
do you have a picture of the mature uncompressed?
I don't have in this view, no. Yeah. So I think you are probably trying to say that maybe the compression changed for the subchondral bone. Yeah. At some point in the project, we thought that, yeah, we looked at it a bit. It didn't seem to be that much of something that is happening, but we didn't really like measure it or something like that. Yeah. It's important to note that the subchondral bone in immature pigs is very, very soft. So sometimes like we'll be introducing the blade to make the crack, and the blade just keeps on going. And it's like, where is the bone? And just it's a soft material. So sometimes like I will lose a sample, even like the blade is just going through. Yes, friend.
I think it would be really interesting if you were able to somehow visualize what's happening at a more local level around the crack, like at the level of the converse site.
Yeah.
See how I can do this. But I think it's very possible that you can have the exact same apparent level type of mechanical behavior.
Yeah.
But then at the level of the converse site, in the
Something-
city of the crack, you get stress shielding, you get converse sites
course,
tying
yeah.
off, and so it could be really
Very
relevant
different,
to
yeah.
disease and injury.
Yeah.
And if you just look at that apparent measure of stress relaxation,
It might not indicate a lot, right?
well, you could
Yeah.
be
I mean,
something really important.
that's very true what you're saying, because when I show the diagram of the buckling technique, it's totally different. So the cells in that central region are, of course, experiencing different types of shears, because when the fibers are bending and changing in direction, the cells at that location are experiencing totally different measures of local shears. So that is very correct. Biologically, it will have probably a very significant consequence.
Yeah, and then the other question that I have is when you do the histology and the stain, and you can look at the chondrocytes,
Yeah.
did Does that only pick up in chondrocytes that were alive at the time of staining?
Yeah.
Or the dead cells
So
there too?
yeah, the technique we use in our imaging is not really sensitive to live and dead cells, but maybe if I show you, so if I show you here this picture, so I'm not sure if you can see it, but actually at the location of the crack, the cells are darker than the rest of the cartilage. So here you see some dark dots, which is just around the line of the crack. It's not probably easy to see from a distance, but there is something happening to the cells. And when we started our project, it was clear to us that in the literature there is a lot of interest in cells and biology and signaling and all those details, but no one is really talking about mechanics. So we said, okay, in our study we will forget everything biological, and we just want to give a statement about the mechanic part. But of course now this should be combined with the other parts of the biological. It's not, it's all one system. It's not like a separate environment.
Yeah, just be interesting to me, like what actually the chondrocyte does when you introduce that crack. Does it just cut right through the cell and the cell dies, or does it kind of jump out of the way? I don't know. It would be cool to figure out if the crack does actually, go on.
We are trying a little bit to look into those things with more like confocal microscopy and stuff like that, which can look in real time. There are also some limitations, but it's a very interesting thing to look at. Yes, Raf.
So you finished the first study of
Yeah.
inspecting under the next step is actually looking at different ways, like multiple cracks or as Frank was asking, or maybe a bigger crack
Yeah.
instead of going to immature
Different
cells.
tissue.
So you're starting also a presentation about talking OA, which is something that
Yeah.
we expect to have mature samples.
So yeah, I mean, that would be the logical way, and this is actually the way we went. So after we finished that study, we went with multiple cracks at different angles, but the technicalities into doing those studies were like pushing even beyond this, like with one crack and the thickness of the cartilage and the way we were measuring. So our mechanical testing machine, like you saw, we were only able to go very slow just to detect few things. When we make like more cracks and then you need like a bigger indenter to cover them, and then you don't have a flat surface, you just, yeah, you go too much into complication. But it is the logical way to go with, yeah.
How many cracks you use?
It's only one. It's only one.
But you said, so you try multiple.
We tried 2 cracks
And then one.
under the indentation, and then we tried also like just next to the indentation. And unless it's next to the indentation where like the tissue kind of dips because the indenter is not compressing the other part, then you get a difference. If it's if the 2 cracks are still covered by the indenter, we still were not detecting a difference. And when we tried like 2 cracks next to each other, like a cross type, and it seemed like we're not, I would not say it's necessarily there is no change in the properties, just that probably our system is not really detecting enough, like it's not accurate enough to detect this. So we thought a smarter way is to move to a more comfortable range for our equipment. Yeah.
So when we're talking about cell viability, you're talking about this.
Yeah.
So when you see the cell, when you see a detectable cell death, you see only the crack location, and you see also something.
No, so in our study we just saw this is the only stain that we can see some difference in cells, and I can't tell you exactly that this is cell death because I'm not sure actually what the change in this color means, but it does show that the cells are different than the other cells. So yeah, all the cells here are dead because they are all fixed in histology, but it seems that they probably died at a different time point. Yes.
So my question is, why load in compression? Just looking at the fibers, they're horizontal at the top and then they drive to the vertical. It seems like at the surface it's all about shear. So shouldn't shear be the primary problem when you have a crack?
So I would say that shear is a component of loading in cartilage. In cartilage, you have a 3D loading. You don't have only uniaxial. That almost never happens in real life. But then when you're also looking to just bring some information about something that no one have studied, we're just limiting things. So there was a choice of either going with load, with compression, or going with shear. With shear, there are a little bit more things that you need to account for, which is the friction. Will you go with the same friction that is in real joints? Will you lubricate the joint, or will you add friction to it? And then you are going probably away from the physiological kind of condition even more than we are already not able to imitate that in that much detail. But there are also some studies that we looked at in the literature, and it seemed that where they tested joints in vivo, so live animals, and they will either compress their joints or they will shear them. And it seemed that shear does not produce cracks. But maybe if you have it, then it's a different thing. But we had a bit more information about the story behind cracks in compression, so we were following that story rather than jumping into something.
I'm perfectly happy if the crack is produced by impact.
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with that. But then
It won't pull much if it's not a shear.
it's
Right.
just that once you have a crack, it seems like a big problem would be shear loading, not compression. 'Cause
Yeah.
even if you have already produced a crack in compression,
Mm.
fluid is relatively incompressible, and if it's got nowhere to go, it should still be.
It's just going to be there, right?
And so shear would be the issue, and especially if at the surface the fibers oriented horizontally,
Mm.
then that's their job, I would presume.
Yeah. So, yeah, and at some point I did try to think of a way that if I load the cartilage at an angle and not just like perpendicular, and it seems that if I'm loading it at an angle, the shape then of the indentor becomes a bit of, like the way that you choose that shape will complicate your kind of calculations, the way that you will be able to analyze, and whether you will be covering your crack or not covering your crack, because if you are going more like with a ball shape indentor. So all the things that you're saying are very valid and very relevant, but when we thought about it a bit, it was not the choice that we thought to go with in the beginning. But it's something that needs to be explored. I think what this study shows is that there are, in the fibers direction, basically this is the message, is fibers direction to the load direction and to the crack direction is important. So we did one combination. There are limitless combinations, and now this needs to be explored into different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know what's possible, but I think what I would favor is some combination of shear and compression, but the way to do shear is I would actually sort of have a surface and then a layer of some fluid, viscous fluid, and so it would be viscous shear loading. That way it's a little bit like what would be happening.
What will be happening?
And also it's
Yeah.
distributed and things like that.
True. Yes, Enkon.
It's very clear, nice presentation.
Thank you.
Especially the text that you
Oh, okay.
I thought it's very but I'm wondering
Thanks.
how do you apply this? In what circumstances would you be able to apply that things to enhance our knowledge?
So, yeah, and like for the crack tooth index especially, we think that this is very important to people that work on modeling of cartilage. So models of cartilage have been struggling, and probably any tissue you want to model it and simplify it in the computer, it becomes not as close to the real behavior, and it doesn't get easier than a multiplication. You just have the angle value and the alignment value of the fibers, and you can get a relevant indication of the behavior of the cartilage at that location. So we think this is going to be actually a very important tool for people to integrate into their models and see if it improves it. We hope so.
But one of the key like also people get comment about it.
Yeah.
Crack.
Yeah.
Like crack, normally you have a crack in the joint, and then people are interested in how that crack is propagated throughout the
Yeah.
cycle.
So yeah, crack propagation. Yeah. So I would, of course, like I would imagine people that are looking at cartilage in a more wholesome way in terms of its mechanical properties, not only in collagen fibers, but its directional properties for tear and crack propagation. Then if they integrate this, it might be easier for them. So if they do it in a cyclic loading, which is when you get like crack propagation, so probably in the first cycle, the crack width index will give you some value, right? And then after you remove, the crack might not go back to all because of the other values and the other information that they have into their model. And then in the second loading, you add that remnant effect plus the next crack width index. And so it might still help out. Experimentally or experiment? Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, one thing that in our study is actually we make the crack perpendicular to the fibers in the superficial layer, which is probably not also the way that cracks happen in real life, because when you impact load a joint or cartilage, it will split along the fibers and not perpendicular to the fibers. But we chose this direction because we limited ourselves to standardize one crack, and we wanted with one crack to test the effect of the fibers direction. So with the mature, we had the fibers parallel to the crack, and in the immature, we had the fibers perpendicular. And perpendicular in the deep zone meant also perpendicular in the superficial zone. And it was also like an easier way for us to damage the cartilage, let's say, if we can say that, by our one blade cut as much as possible, rather than just going parallel to as many fibers as we can. So I did also do some cyclic loading on all my samples, and I did not see crack propagation. I did not measure it microscopically, but we were measuring it in the like dissecting scope, and it didn't seem to extend. And this is probably expected because the fibers are more cut perpendicular and not parallel. Yeah. Yes, Mahsen.
So in mature cartilage, you said that the fibers are parallel to the surface of the bone, right?
In mature, immature, yes.
Do we have something like split lines in the superficial zone,
Mm.
in the deep zone, or the fibers are sort of randomly distributed?
Parallel, yeah.
Parallel to the surface? Because you said that when the fibers are perpendicular to the crack in the deep zone, that guarantees that you have the perpendicular.
Oh, no, yeah. No, so yeah, so the split line, yeah, so the split line pattern we do is on the surface. So we target to cut the surface fibers perpendicularly. It appeared to us in our study that when we are looking at this, it seems that majorly of the fibers in the deep zone do run parallel to the surface in both directions, like parallel as in horizontal, and also generally in the direction of the split line pattern. Because if they were not running, if they were like running randomly in the deep zone, their alignment is actually not going to be good, and it's going to show on the polarized microscope. So you will have some fibers when you're doing your histology, some fibers will be cut parallel to your section, and some fibers going like this in all directions, and those will show as like different.
So you think that fibers are
Directional?
They do have a directionality?
I don't have it, but from my picture, I would say that they probably are following generally the fibers direction of the superficial zone. I did not really measure it. I did not kind of try to do a split line pattern in the deep zone, which is possible to do. Like you can do on the superficial zone and then shave that part of the cartilage and do another split line. I did not do that. Yeah. Yes, Ra. We tried very hard to get. We got 3 very valuable, we are keeping them for a study now. Yes, so it's difficult to get because in the market, most of the pigs are slaughtered at a young age. So if you want old and mature pigs, you need to go to like research animals, and pig doesn't grow up in like, in 2 days or like 3 months like a rabbit. So growing them up is raising them is expensive, and breeding them, you need like big facilities. But we are lucky to get few, and we are doing so. I haven't not yet done the testing on them. We are first looking at their histology to first confirm that actually we got them at the right age and that their histology is good, and then we are doing this on them. Yes, and go on. Go more, it's okay.
So most of the people like they put a lot of focus on superficial on tissue.
Yeah.
Because there's an area of the tissue that starts degrading.
Yeah.
But it seems like you put a lot of focus on the deep zone.
Mm.
Which,
Yeah.
you put a lot of focus on the collagen fiber segmentations
Mm.
in the deep zones.
So
how about the superficial for you?
So I think I explained more about the deep zone, but the way that our crack width index is working is actually regardless of the zone. So it predicted same for the superficial zone and for the deep zone. It was able to predict. So I would say like the study did look at all, but because the visually it's easier to explain on the deep zone, I was probably just like highlighting it more. But yeah, like the opening, we always had a bigger opening in the surface, and of course the surface is what degrades in the beginning. But biology, you never know actually what's happening deep and up and left or right. Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.